Okay, so I think we can get started with today's webinar. My name's Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, Leveraging Historical Data for Better Software Development Estimation. Before we get started, I'd like to make you aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the presentation are currently on mute. So to ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog box shown on the right-hand side of the WebEx screen. Keith will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. He'll also have a little break for questions halfway through as well. But if he doesn't have time to answer your question, don't worry. I'll save any questions that we don't get to and refer them to Keith so he can get back to you. So I'll start by introducing our presenter today. Keith Ciocco has more than 30 years of experience working in sales and customer service, with 25 of those years spent at QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting QSM clients with their estimation and measurement goals, managing business development and existing client relations, and he has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM, and has played a leading role in communicating the value of the QSM tools and services to professionals in the software development, engineering, and IT industries. So, without further delay, I'll let Keith get started.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate it. So my plan will be to take you through a brief slide presentation, providing a background on QSM, and I will also be showing some best practices on how we use our tools to capture and analyze historical data, and both for process improvement reasons as well as to make better early decisions and to improve estimation. So that'll be the focus. We'll also have some, like Elizabeth mentioned, we'll also have some time for question and answer as well. We'll break kind of in the middle or after the slide presentation, and then at the end we'll leave a few minutes for questions. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick background on QSM in case you've never attended one of our webinars before. Celebrating our 43-year anniversary. So 43 years in business, and we're mostly known for being the developers of the SLIM suite of tools for our benchmarking and estimation and metric services, as well as being a research provider. The research actually comes from the QSM industry database, which is goes back all 43 years, thousands of projects. And what it does is it provides us with the latest information on cost and schedule and effort, things you see here on the slide, team size, scope, and we leverage all this information to help our clients improve their software development and technology development types of processes, as well as to help them improve planning and estimation capabilities. Now, this is what we call the software production equation. It's also known as the Putnam model. So Larry Putnam Sr. Started QSM back in the late 70s, and he initially developed these models. And of course, they've been updated and kept current with the latest technologies. And it really is kind of the cornerstone of the SLIM tools that you're going to be seeing today that I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate for you. And what we're doing here really is we're linking the amount of functionality or value delivered or size delivered to the time and the effort that it takes to deliver it. In addition to that, we're linking the level of productivity that it's going to take to deliver that value or functionality. Okay, so this is very important, and it's going to be key to the rest of the webinar really, because it really is the key to the historical data focus that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so benefits to leveraging historical data. Here are the top 4 of my benefits on my list here. Number 1 is leveraging historical data helps us uncover strengths and weaknesses for process improvement. Number 2, improves estimation capabilities. and not only in-house types of programs, but also vendor development. So if we're managing, if we have a big outsourcing effort and we're managing vendors, they're coming in with multiple bids for cost and schedule and quality. It's great to have historical data available to sanity check whatever they're proposing, right? To make sure that we're all on the same page and to make sure we're getting a fair price. So historical data with improving estimation capabilities is very important. Number three, historical data helps enhance our proposal work and the ability to win business. And number four, it increases our negotiation capabilities. We're going to talk about all this today in the webinar. But first, I just want to take a pause, and we want to get the audience involved if possible and ask you to answer this one question. And you'll see a dialog box pop on the screen here in a second. And the question is, what type of historical data are you currently capturing? Okay, and you can choose as many of the answers as you feel apply to you, and you'll have about a minute to answer the question. So so feel free to please answer the question, then we'll talk about it. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, great. About a minute is up, and go ahead and see the answers to the questions. Okay. Looking at it here now, and feel free to, if you'd like to remove the polling dialog box, feel free, so that you can see the whole screen. But it looks like, and this is very interesting, looks like most of you all chose duration as the most popular historical data, or the most popular data point. So 83% of you picked duration, 67% picked effort, and 67% picked cost. 57% chose size. That's interesting. Sizing is usually the biggest challenge, right? And 37% picked peak staffing, and then 3% said none of the above. So those were the percentage breakouts of the answers that you all provided. So again, most everybody chose duration. That seems to be the most popular data point for historical data capturing. And again, thank you for doing that. Interesting that duration is captured the most. That's actually one of the 4 to 5 measures that we recommend that you focus on. And so that's a good thing. One of the issues that we often see, and I don't know if you all run into this, but oftentimes when data is captured, it's often used for planning at a granular level, like it's implemented as hours per task or hours per person and things like that. And that's okay, but we also want to use the data at the release level. So because when you see it at a higher level, we can use it to make early decisions more effectively. And that's going to be one of the topics that we cover today. I'm going to actually show some examples of this today. And we're going to focus a lot on the schedule and the effort and the size and the cost. So all those popular measures that you all chose. Also, just a quick note on sizing. Sizing, like I mentioned, is usually the biggest challenge to deal with, but it's very helpful to have a handle on size when focused on early planning. And I think it's interesting that 57% of you are actually capturing sizing information. So that's a great thing. Probably a lot of that has to do, I know the Agile movement has really popularized sizing, a focus on sizing data, which has been great for estimating and early planning. We'll talk more about that as well. Also, just keep in mind, even history from a small number of projects can be helpful. People often think they have to have a ton of data, but that's not always the case. That's not always necessary. I mean, the more the better, but if we can start with just a few data points, it can make a huge difference in our planning success. So keep that in mind if you can. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and again, thank you for taking part in that poll. That was very interesting. Really fits in well too with what we're going to talk about. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So these are actually the core metrics that we recommend that you focus on. And you can see on the slide, it's a snapshot from our data manager tool. And you can see that we are capturing size with number of stories, okay? And then also duration and effort. You can see number of months and person hours. And once we have these basic metrics, we can calculate what we call a PI, and you can see that on the bottom right there. You can see the 22.2 calculation. So PI, or productivity index, like we saw in that software production slide, right, where we linked the size to the time and the effort and to the productivity. That PI is that productivity factor that I was talking about. And give you a little background on the PI. The PI is actually a macro measure for productivity and efficiency, and it takes into account the overall project environment, including things like experience level of the people, tools and methods you might be using, complexity of the work that you're delivering, the overall maturity of the process that you're in. And I'm kind of defining that for you now because we're going to be talking a lot about productivity as we go through the webinar. So I just wanted you to be a little bit familiar with that measure when I mention it. Now, the other reason why, and I mentioned this as a top 4 reasons that it's important, big reason historical data is important is because it helps us negotiate. And usually when we're doing proposals or we're coming up with cost or budgets or schedules for software development or any other technology development, we often get challenged, right, on the targets that we're setting. People are telling us, hey, that's not realistic, or I don't think I can do that. If we have historical data to lean on, we can use that to show that, look, here's why I believe in the numbers. It's because we've done it in the past. And that's what this chart actually shows. And I show this a lot. So if you've been to our webinars in the past, you've probably seen this. But this is probably my favorite view here. This is actually a chart. You see time on the vertical, time on the vertical, size on the horizontal, and you can see this cluster of data points. That's from actually the QSM industry database that I mentioned. And then you can see a relationship here, right? So as the size gets bigger, the projects are taking longer. And I'm saying projects, but this could be defined as a delivery or a release, right? However you define the work that you're focused on. And then in big red letters, we see what we call the impossible zone. And this is really what we want to stay away from. We want to be able to negotiate away from this. And I can tell you from doing this for a long time, people sign up to the impossible zone every day, right? They'll commit to a schedule or a budget that's not reasonable. And the reason why they commit is because they don't have any historical data, or they have it, but they're not using tools to leverage it and to analyze it and to communicate it with the stakeholders. So this is huge. This is really important. And we're going to show some examples of how we can leverage this type of information with the QSM tools today. And before I actually start showing the examples, I just wanted to give a quick overview and then allow just a couple minutes for questions as kind of a starting point. So this is actually the SLIM suite of tools in summary level, obviously. SLIM Estimate, I'm going to just briefly go through this just so you have a kind of a high-level idea. So SLIM Estimate is our tool that's used to figure out those early decisions, right? What should this release or delivery or project cost? How long should it take? How much effort are we going to need? Do we have the capacity to meet the demand? What's the quality going to be like at delivery? All those types of questions are answered with SLIM Estimate. Incidentally, SLIM is an acronym for Software Lifecycle Management, in case you're wondering, also known as the Putnam model, like I mentioned earlier. The SLIM Data Manager actually comes with the estimating package, and this is where you would be able to capture all that historical data to analyze it for process improvement and also to improve your estimating capabilities. So the Data Manager, very important. We're going to talk more about that today. And then SLIM Metrics is our process improvement tool, right? So we're going to take all that historical data that you capture, or you would, and you're going to use metrics to analyze it and figure out where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, what are the relationships in the data, what characteristics of each project are affecting the cost and the schedule and the effort, how can I improve? How do we compare to industry, and how do we compare within our own organization? So that is SLIM metrics. Okay, SLIM control is for tracking and oversight and re-estimating if things change. Okay, we also call it adaptive forecasting, plans versus actuals, then rerunning estimates based on those actuals and seeing what the forecasts are to completion. And then master plan enables us to estimate at the portfolio level as well. Okay, and then SLIM Collaborate is our cloud-based version of all of this. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and just pause now. That's kind of a little summary of the SLIM suite that we're going to be talking about today. And let's go ahead and pause for questions if we have any. Happy to answer some right now.
Yeah, we have one already. Could you just add a little context to size and how you're defining that?
Yes, absolutely. So size is part of that production equation that I brought up, right? Is basically it's the work that it's the functionality or value that you're delivering to your client, either internal or external client, and it can be defined however you would like based on your project environment. So it might be defined as number of user stories, number of story points, number of features, number of epics, number of lines of code, number of function points. So we can measure size in whatever unit you're comfortable with, but in summary, it's really the value that you're delivering to the organization or to the client. Hope that answered it okay.
Okay. Where does your industry data come from?
Great question. We get asked that quite a bit. So the industry data actually comes from the clients that we work with by permission. So the trend lines that you're going to see in the tools today all work from all work that we do with our clients. So clients submit projects to us on a voluntary basis, and we capture the projects, as many as we can get, as large enough sample as we can get throughout the year. And we go through a very strict validation process and make sure all the data is consistent and make sure that we have, for example, sizing information, which is really important. So short answer there is, from our work with our clients, both in tool support as well as consulting.
Just one more, and then just keep to the audience, you can keep using that Q&A dialog box for questions throughout the presentation. We'll have another break for Q&A at the end. So just one more question for now, and that is, how are you measuring productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. So productivity is calculated based on the time and the effort and the functionality that's being delivered within that time and effort. We're measuring with that productivity index or that PI that I had shown, and we're going to talk more about it as well. So calculated based on the amount of value or functionality linked to the time and the effort that it takes to deliver that functionality. So actually, short answer is we calculate the productivity from your historical data, and that's the essence really of this whole presentation. Was that the last question for now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all and thank you, Elizabeth. I'll go ahead and continue. I'm going to go ahead and start showing some examples here. Okay, so what better place to start than the SLIM Data Manager, right? That's the repository tool to capture all this historical data. And you can see here that we've got a list of projects. I can view this data in multiple ways. If I wanted to look at it in detail, I could do that. You can see a whole report broken out by phase and milestone, cost, schedule, effort. But for this presentation, let's go ahead and just focus on this list that I'm showing you here. So because this really exemplifies what you would want to do. You would want to put in capture as many historical data projects as you can and store them in one centralized location so that everyone can leverage it that's working on software development, delivery, releases, technology development, all that type of work. So we want to have all the historical data pulled together and want to leverage it and use it to help ourselves do a better job of making early decisions. So this is basically a list of projects. We're going to open one up here. and we're going to do the software as a service example. This is a project that's been completed, or a release or delivery that's been completed. And you can see the type of information we want to capture, and we've broken this out by different tabs, right? You can see I can scroll through here. Let's start here in the basic area here. First thing we'd want to do is we want to capture the name of the project and the status, whether it's completed or whether it's still in progress. We'd want to track the confidence level of the data. We'd want to track how much value or functionality was delivered, right? That's the sizing area. And here we're using stories, but we can use whatever function unit we're comfortable with. Like I mentioned earlier, someone had asked that question, how do you define it? So we could use story points, user stories, features, etc. Okay, or a combination. We could use multiple metrics as well. I'm going to show you some examples. And then we want to also capture the time and the effort. Broken out by phase here, but if we can't get it by phase, if we can get the time and the effort overall for the project, that's very helpful. And then once we have that functionality and the size and the effort, we'll calculate that productivity index that I mentioned earlier. And you can see here again, it's calculated as a 22.4. Okay? Now, keep in mind, the higher the measure of the PI, the better. And it's also broken out by complexity. So for example, if you're building engineering systems, those PIs, you're doing well if those PIs are in the 5 to 10 range. For folks that are building business applications, more straightforward types of web development, IT infrastructure, those PIs tend to be higher just because some of those examples are less complex. They're a little bit more straightforward. So the more now that's not saying an infrastructure project can't be complex, but depending on the type or the application domain that you're in will also affect that productivity index. The level of complexity that you're working in will affect this measure. Okay, so keep that in mind, and we'll revisit that. So we start with those basic measures. But we can also go a little deeper. So we can track the application domain, and you can go a little deeper here, break it out by industry sector. Got, military and financial and government and engineering. The application broken out by percentage. In this example, it's 100% business. The development machine, the operating environment, all that information can be captured to help us make more educated decisions going forward. These are the characteristics of the project, and we're going to actually build some relationships in the data in a few minutes and show some examples of how we can leverage all this information. Sizing information, like I mentioned, here we've got a combination of measures. We're using stories and lines of code, and we've got business requirements. We're breaking the languages out into different areas, right, into different types. We want to track labor rates, not only at the project or release level, but also at the skill level. We can create custom metrics, okay, and we can track the quality and then review. How did we do compared to the estimate? So once that project or release or delivery has been completed, were we 5% off? Were we 10% off? That way we can manage the uncertainty more effectively on our future estimates, okay? So if we know how far we were off originally on the previous work, we can use that information to give ourselves a little more buffer when we're planning going forward. Okay, so keep that in mind. So this would be a place that you could capture your historical data. And remember, we don't need hundreds of projects. I mean, if it's helpful even if we can pull together 2 or 3 projects, 5 or 6 projects, right? So even a small sample is helpful. And we don't need a lot of data within those deliveries or projects. Even if we only had this basic information tab, that would go a long way into helping us be more successful with planning and estimating. Even if we only knew, the sizing, the time, and the effort, so we can calculate what our efficiency or productivity is. Now, we're going to use that information now in our Slim Metrics tool. Okay, so this is where we're going to do the analysis work, and where we're going to actually set up relationships so we can see how we're doing and where we need to improve, and we're going to see how this information can affect our estimating. Okay, so first off, what we're looking at here on the architecture scale is, to the left we've got a navigator, and I've actually got 2 workbooks open. I've got demographics for projects being assessed, and I've got a workbook that says trends over time for projects being assessed. So 2 workbooks with just a few views in each one. Now, if I wanted to, I could fill this whole screen with views, right? A whole host of analytics that I could use to communicate with the stakeholders. But for these purposes here, for the webinar, we're just going to keep it short and sweet. And the first view that I'm looking at is pretty straightforward. It's basically number of projects, right, per application domain. So here you can see that I've got, or this particular group or portfolio has 36 projects that are business applications and 14 projects that are telecommunications related. Okay, pretty simple, right? Total number of projects broken out by application type. Now, what these tools allow us to do is actually create what we call data definitions, right? It actually helps us define all that historical data I showed you earlier, define it so that it means something to the organization. And we do that by actually creating conditions or pulling together conditions, which are really attributes of a project or a release or a delivery. And we're going to use those attributes and see how each project team did and see where our strengths are, and we're going to look at the detail level because we're going to want to know that information going forward. When I say detail level, I mean cost, schedule, effort, not just cost, right? We want to look at multiple metrics, but at the release level. So I'm going to go ahead and show an example. We're going to go to metrics here, and I'm going to go to data set definitions. And you can see I've already got some data sets loaded up, but let's go ahead and create a new one just to show you how it works. I'm going to say new here, and let's go ahead and work with the business database, right, from QSM, that industry database. And I'm just going to say, let's take a look at some of the business apps. And now here's where I would have the option to break this out into different characteristics, so to speak. I could look at, all the business applications that get done in 6 months that are within $1 million that had a PI of 40 or 30 or lower or 20 or higher, right? So I can break out those parameters based on whatever I'd like to see. But for this demonstration, let's go ahead and start here. We'll say we're going to create a business condition, and then we're going to say, okay, let's take a look at just the business applications that have PIs that are, let's say, greater than 20. Okay. We want to see the best. We want to see why those projects perform so well so that we can use that information the next time we have to make a decision, right? The PIs that are in the 20 range tend to be high performers. So we're going to say, okay, do we have any? How many do we have? And I'm going to test the condition, and it's telling me that I have 8 projects. So that's good news. So we have 8 projects that are business applications that have PIs that are greater than 20. So I'm going to say okay. I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to say greater than 20. And then I'm going to say okay and save it. And then great. Okay, so I got that initial view here where it's showing me 36 business applications. I'm going to go ahead and right click on the chart, and I'm going to bring in that data set that I just created. I'm going to say okay, great. So there we are. So now visually now I can see that out of those 36 projects, 8 of those projects had PIs that were greater than 20. And for my organization, that might mean those were the high performers. I want to take a closer look to see why I did so well, so I can repeat the process. Okay, so that's one example of how we would create a relationship and all that data that you pulled together. And then we can actually set it up for viewing so that you can communicate effectively and negotiate with the stakeholders or the client. That's one example. Now I could scroll down here and take a look at some other demographics. So in this example here, we're looking at number of projects per location. Actually, in this example, it's per country. And you can see here that all of my projects were developed in the United States. All of my software systems were developed in the United States. Now, this is pretty straightforward. We might have a situation where 30% of the development is done in India, and 40% is done in Canada, and the rest is done in the United States, right? So it's helpful to see a breakout of where all the work is happening for future reference. This next view actually breaks everything out by development class. The first thing that hits me here is most of our work is new development, 36% of it, and the second most popular would be 22%, it would be major enhancements. So this is telling me that we're spending a lot of money on new development, major work that's brand new to the team. Okay, and then we finish with about 20% is minor enhancements, 4% are conversions. So this is helpful to know just to see where the resources are going and where have we been mostly focused recently. This actually breaks everything out by language domain or language type. You can see here most of our projects are written in C++ in this particular portfolio. Let's take a little deeper look here. This is actually a scatter plot that shows a relationship of people to quality. Okay, so you can see here, I hope that WebEx bar is not in the way. I hope you can see everything. This is actually showing us a scatter plot, and it's got an industry trend. This could be an industry trend line, or it could be your own custom trend line that you've created in Slim Metrics. And all these data points that you see are your projects hypothetically in that data manager, in that repository that you created, that you pulled together. And now I can see some relationships here. So I can see as we add people, we're actually finding more defects, right? Pretty straightforward analysis there. Now, if I wanted to, I could go a little deeper. I could say, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about these projects because I want to avoid a situation where I'm finding a ton of defects. And you can see these were outliers here, kind of outside the standard deviation. And if I right-click, I can actually get a summary of that particular project. You can see it's a banking system, and we had 8 people, and we discovered a total of 500 defects. Okay. Now, if I want to go deeper, I can say, okay, give me the full detail there because I want to bore in on this and find out what was going on by phase or by milestone or by sprint, or I want to really get all the characteristics here broken out for myself. Right? So it gives me the ability to go deeper if I need to. Now the next view is similar, except now we're looking at people in relation to cost. It's kind of the similar, as we add people, cost is going to go up, right? Pretty straightforward. And then what are the PIs per project? What level of productivity are we hitting? And all these views actually toggle to a report as well. And you can see here the chart, which can be exported out to Excel. And the first thing that hits me here is that most of our projects fall within the 14 to 18 productivity index level, which is very good for a business application, which is good. And then I might notice down here that I hit one that was kind of an outlier, that I actually hit the 30 threshold. So that's something I want to take a closer look at and find out, why that project performed so well, so that I can, again, hopefully repeat the process and then use that information to make some decisions going forward. Now, I've kind of shown you some views that were already built, but it's very easy to create your own. So I could go in here and I could say, okay, let me create my own view. And I'm going to go to this Edit View Layout, and I'm going to actually have access to a whole host of bar charts and histograms and scatter plots and multimetric charts to bring all those conditions to life, so to speak, right? Remember, we set those up in the data manager, custom metrics, all the basic measures. Now we want to look at, the relationships. So again, similar to what I just showed, but I'm going to go and just create one here. Say OK. And then that view shows up in my editor here, my outline navigator. And now I can see, okay, great. Well, here's I wanted to see, how is the size? Someone asked earlier about sizing, right? How do I define it? Well, multiple ways to define it. Here I'm using lines of code, but this could say stories, it could say features, story points, right? But what this is showing us is as the projects are getting bigger, they're taking longer. See the schedule there on the vertical, or duration, right? So pretty simple relationship. I also have the flexibility to make adjustments midway. I could say, okay, what's the cost relationship? How does size affect the cost? Earlier I showed how did the staffing affect the cost. Now I'm looking at scope, right? How much did the functionality affect the cost? So as we're developing more functionality, the cost is going up. And then we have these views over time, right? We want to see if we're improving, where we might be able to improve, show more improvement, things like that. So this first view in this particular workbook is actually looking at number of projects per fiscal year. Pretty straightforward. You can see we peaked out here, and from 2013 to 2014, we completed 19 projects. We came down just a little bit the following year, but not much. Quality over time. Here we're looking at average defects per man month or per person month, but this could be, mean time to defect, it could be total defects, it could be defect density. So we're flexible here, big in the reliability modeling. But in this example, we're looking at defects per man month, and you can see that from 2013 to 2014, we actually started finding more defects, went up a little bit. Staffing was pretty similar from 14 to 15, right? Stayed up pretty high. This is average peak staff by fiscal year. Our PI over time, so our productivity actually went up each year. You can see a pretty nice increase from 2013 to 2014, and then our cost over time, you can see because of that PI going up, the cost actually went down a little bit in 2014. And that's usually the impact of that productivity index. Usually when we're performing at a higher level of productivity, we're saving money and we're saving on schedule and we're delivering better quality products. And that's why it's so important to measure, and that's why it's so important to leverage all this history and use it to help negotiate your future plans. That brings me to the next step, and I'm going to go ahead and show how we would actually leverage all this analysis capability when we're estimating. So we're going to go over here to Slim Estimate, which is the estimating tool that I had mentioned, right? Okay, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to load that history in to the estimating tool, and you can see the projects load in. You hit OK, and then now we can use all that information to do a better job of planning. So the first thing that kind of jumps out at us here is, again, same architecture. We've got the navigator to our left with multiple views to describe an estimate that I've already actually run in this situation. Okay, this is the staffing profile in this example, and I'm going to show multiple examples. This is the staffing profile, and if I look down to the kind of the bottom center, you can see the actual summary of the estimate, which is telling me that this project is going to take about 10 months, 10 and a half months. It's going to cost me about $2.6 million. I'm going to ramp up to 20 people, okay? And I'm going to deliver 28,000 implementation units, which is the sizing unit I'm using right now. It's called an implementation unit, okay? If I look to my left, in fact, let me blow this up. This is actually that historical data that we just brought in, all that data that you captured hypothetically and then you analyzed and looked at for those characteristics and conditions. Is now showing up in our estimating tool, and now we can see that historical data, your historical data, alongside your estimate. So this blue data point would be an estimate for effort on the vertical. The trend line that you see, it can be the industry average from that QSM database, or it could be a custom trend line that you created, or that you built, or that you set up based on all of your data. And so right off the bat here, we can see that this estimate is not in line. We've actually overpriced this software system, okay, by a little bit because it's outside the standard deviation there. Okay, same with schedule. Schedule's a little high here. We're actually allowing ourselves a little bit too much time compared to the industry average and compared to the work we've done in the past. Okay, let's take a step back for a second. Those are kind of the outputs. Let's actually show an example of how we would run this. So we'll go in here and we'll say, okay, and again, we're going to leverage our historical data. We're going to put in the start date of the project. We're going to determine how do we typically allocate our resources. Okay, so in this example, we have all these choices, right? For all 20 people, do we gradually add them on, then take them off gradually? Do we go from start to finish, all the same number of people, right? So we're going to decide based on our historical data how we want to allocate our resources. We're going to decide based on our historical data how much work we think we can deliver within a certain time and a certain budget. Now in this example, we're going to go ahead and say the customer is needing this amount of functionality, 28,000 implementation units. Remember, that could be story points. It's customizable. You can set that up however you want. And we go a little deeper here if we want to, and we can break that out into more detail. And we can say, okay, well, this is how many screens, or this is how many reports, or this is how many interfaces. That would be using your own historical data, right, based on work you've done in the past. If you don't have any historical data, then we're going to leverage the QSM historical data from that industry database, and we're going to use a t-shirt sizing technique here, or a rough order of magnitude size estimate, and just tell Slim, is this big, small, or medium, right? Small, medium, large. And when I do that, it's leveraging the QSM historical data. And we're using a range because we're early in the decision-making process, right? Okay, so we want to be able to input this information based on our experience, based on actual data points, size, how we allocate our resources, and then that productivity index again. Remember, we talked about that quite a bit now. We're going to put in our productivity index, and it's going to either be based on our own historical data, and we can pick and choose which projects are relevant, right? You can see the PI calculate based on your historical data, based on the work that was delivered, or the functionality and the time and the effort it took on each of those projects. We're recalculating that PI based on this new project, right? Or if we don't have any historical data, we can use the industry database and get the industry average PI. And then we can tell Slim that if we're not sure, we can use a range. We can tell Slim that we're not really sure. We want to tweak our uncertainty range here and use a range for the PI and the size to give ourselves some buffer. Okay, and then we want to make a decision. There's actually a little bit more information you can put in. We go ahead and enter in a labor rate. Okay, this can populate automatically for you based on your previous work, or you can change it and break this out into level of detail, right? Many levels of detail. And then I'm going to make a decision. Do I want to do the estimate based on the industry data? Do I want to do the estimate based on my own historical data? And do I have a specific parameter that I'm tied to? Like, I've got to get this thing done in a certain amount of time, or I have a certain amount of people that I'm working with, right? I know I have 20 people. Build me a project plan around 20 people. Or do I have multiple constraints? Time, effort, quality, people, right? So it gives me flexibility there. Then when I hit OK, it runs the estimate, and it brings me back to this analysis area where I can take a look at it like we already have. We saw that it was a little high based on industry, also based on our own historical data. And then we can make some adjustments, right? It gives us the ability to look at different trade-offs. So I can say, okay, great. What if we add people? And if I'm doing this in a spreadsheet and I don't have Slim, that could be a problem, because if I'm doing an estimate in a spreadsheet, those tend to be very linear, right? So what I'd rather do in this situation is use Slim, because it's based on the historical data that we've been talking about. And I could say, okay, great. Will it help me to add people? What if I add 5 people? How much more will that cost, and how much longer, and will that shorten the schedule? Now, if I had run this in a spreadsheet and I run the estimate, there you go, 25 people, right? It's going to save me a little bit of time, maybe 2 weeks. It's going to throw the cost way up. I know that because of the historical data that's built into these tools. If I'm doing a homegrown spreadsheet or something like that, adding those people might have told me good news, right? But by using these tools and models, I can see, wow, that might not be a great idea. We know, based on all the research, that we often get a diminishing returns when we add people to a project. And so that's a decision we need to make, but at least now we have all the information at our fingertips. We can go to the stakeholders, we can show them this and say, look, we can save that 2 weeks, but it's going to cost me an extra $700,000. Is that worth it? Or should we let the schedule just go those 2 weeks and save a little bit of money? Can the customer wait those 2 weeks? Can they live without those extra features, things like that? So we're negotiating. Another trade-off I might look at is, how much more is it going to cost, if we add all that functionality in? So I can quickly see. These are all estimates within a couple seconds here. Once I have a template built, I can run the estimates pretty quickly. So more functionality or value delivered, it's going to take me longer. It's going to cost me a lot more money. Okay, and then this is at the release level, but we'll also break it out for you. So now we're looking at the staffing, right? Staffing by role by month, how many people we're going to use in each of these categories. Effort by role by month. In fact, all this toggles to a report. If I want to bring it out into a spreadsheet, I can. Okay, and same with the cost as well. So early on, we're figuring that high-level estimate out, but we can also break it out into detail as well. And all these toggle to reports, so we can bring them out into Excel. Now, I know I'm kind of running out of time here. Slim is template-based. right? So I opened up this template here that was more of a kind of a traditional, almost like a waterfall type of template. But if I wanted to, I could have opened something totally different. This is actually an Agile Scrum example. Here we're looking at a time box, right? And you can see kind of the same architecture within Slim. Got the navigator here with all my analytics so I can communicate to the stakeholders. And then, I've got the staffing profile, but now it looks different. It's more of a box shape, right? Agile Scrum. We're going to deliver, it's telling us we're going to deliver this in about 10 sprints. If I look down to the bottom center, it's going to take me about 4.7 months, 6,700 person hours of effort. It's going to cost about $1 million. That's my estimate. Now, if I wanted to get done in 4 months, that's a problem, right? It's telling me closer to 5. If I look to my right here, I've got a risk gauge. Risk gauge is telling me that I only have about a 5% chance, 4.51% chance to be exact, of getting done within the target that I had hoped for. So I'm in trouble here. So what can we do about that? So we can look at those trade-offs again. Does it help me to add people? Will it help me to, reduce the functionality? All those kinds of trade-offs we can look at within seconds. So as a product owner, I might come in here and say, well, don't worry, I think we can get it done. Let's find out how much it'll cost if we add that extra Scrum team in. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll add the extra Scrum team in right now. I'll say okay. And then boom, within seconds, I've got a whole new estimate. It shows me I doubled the staff, added that extra Scrum team in, but I'm only saving 2 weeks. Instead of 10 sprints, I'm delivering in 8.5. It's going to throw my cost up to $1.8 million. Is that worth it? At least now we have the analytics to talk about it, right? Another question that's often asked we work with a lot of Agile clients, right? What's it going to cost to add in that extra backlog? And how much longer will it take? And how many sprints will it take? Hit OK, and then there you go. It's going to take me almost 14 sprints. It's going to take me 3 or 4 more months, and it's going to throw the cost way up. So when I add that extra backlog in, at least now I'm prepared. I can make some decisions based on that added functionality. Now, I know I'm almost out of time here, and I do want to leave some time for questions, but I just want to get a couple more thoughts out there to you. 10 sprints, 4.5 months, right? This was an estimate that I had already run. How did I run it? How did this actually happen? Let's just go back a step. In addition to that detailed view I showed you earlier, right, where you're coming in here and you can really detail, this is actually an Agile example now. I think before I showed screens and reports. This is, breaking everything out by features and stories and things like that, right? If I don't have that level of detail, that's okay. That's one of the benefits to these tools. You can make early decisions when there's not a lot of information available. How do I do that? Okay, so I would come over here and I'd say, okay, let's do, because I'm a Scrum Master now, or I'm a product owner, let's do a time box estimate. I'm going to come in and say, okay, great. Name of the project, phases that I want to include in the estimate, start date, application domain. Okay, I want to emphasize this. This is really important. These are all knowledge bases within the QSM database, right? Broken out all by all different types of application domains. When I click on one of these, what happens is it brings in the typical cost and schedule and effort numbers for this type of project. Not only this type of project, but the most recent projects, most recent deliveries, most recent releases of cost, schedule, and effort. So when I click on that, it brings all that in. And then when I hit next, the PI is going to populate based on my historical data. And then I'm going to put in what my fixed parameters are, right? When we're doing Scrum, they often tell you, well, I already know the schedule. Okay, fine, we'll put it in. I already know how many people. Okay, great, we'll put that in. Because it's early, right? We're making a go or no-go decision. We want to know if those parameters are realistic or not so we don't lose money and so we don't lose a client. So we're going to put in the PI, was automatic, came in for me, and then the parameters that are needed that the customer wants to make sure this is realistic. Make sure their targets are realistic. So I'm going to hit next, runs the model, brings me back to that analysis area again. It's comparing solutions, running the model, calculating, and there we go. So there's the 5 months that I put in fixed, 9 people. So I put those 2 parameters in, and it's so that because I knew that's what they needed, and it's telling me how much it's going to cost to deliver within those parameters. $1.2 million, 7,700 person hours of effort, and it's telling me how much scope I can actually deliver within those parameters, 256 stories. Okay, so I put in the parameters that I was told. I built a project plan around those, and then I was able to figure out the other parts of that equation. Remember the production equation I showed you earlier, the Putnam model? Larry Putnam Sr. had developed it. That's what we're doing here. We're linking the amount of functionality or value delivered to the time and effort that it takes to deliver it and to the level of productivity that it takes to deliver it. And this first estimate that I ran earlier, right? Let's go back. By the way, this is a solution log. These are all estimates for the same release, so I can look at all the trade-offs. And then I just click on it, and it all comes back on that estimate. So if I like a certain estimate or someone else on the team does, we can go back to that, click on it, updates all the views for that. Okay, so I ran that estimate, right? 4.5 months, 6,700 person hours. Let's figure that this was right out of the box. I had no data, right? I'm just relying on the QSM right out of the box, the QSM models. And then a lot of times we can run another estimate again later, right? We get more information on the project and then we run another one and then another one. That's great. But if we don't have that luxury, these tools are even more valuable. So I can come in here and say, okay, great, 4.7 months. Let's do a contingency plan right now. If I don't have the luxury of redoing the estimate later as more information comes in, I have to make a decision today. We can do a contingency plan right now and say, okay, great. Give me the schedule and the budget that I've got a 90% chance of achieving. And within seconds, I can run the model again, 2 steps, boom. Gives me a more conservative estimate, 11 sprints instead of 10, a few extra weeks, a little bit more money budgeted just in case. It gives me a nice conservative estimate. I'm going to log that as my 90% solution and keep it because that's the one I like, right? And then you did that high-level estimate, and then Slim will calculate the cost per sprint. It will calculate the velocity, and it will let you evaluate the risk, and it will let you sanity check that estimate with the most recent Agile projects. There it is. So there's my estimate in blue, the industry trend line from our most recent Agile projects, and then those triangles are, hypothetically, they would be your projects from that data manager that you chose to pull in because you knew the characteristics, because you analyzed them in Slim metrics. That brings me to my conclusion. So in summary, really, I mean, being able to leverage the historical data really helps us see where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are, so we can really improve our processes, and not only that, but help us improve our decision-making capability, our estimation capability early on in the process. Gives us a leg to stand on if people push back, right? Show them the historical data. You can't argue with historical data. And it gives us a communication vehicle so we can negotiate. Thank you for listening today. I will go ahead and turn it back over to Elizabeth if there are any questions.
Sure, and just as a reminder, we will have a replay available of this presentation. So if there's anything you missed, or if you want to share it with a colleague, I will send a link to the replay as well as a copy of the slides early next week. But yeah, we'll start with our first question, which is typically how long does this process take? Entering data or exporting data, manipulating data to get a Slim estimate.
It can take a few minutes, or it can take, yeah, so it depends on where you are in the process, right? So if you're just starting and if you have zero data and you just open up the Slim tool, you would leverage the data that's built into the Slim models, and you would be able to do a high-level estimate within a few minutes. Okay, now, having said that, you're going to want to take a class first, right? There's a class, online, instructor-led, where we teach you how to use it, and we show you, how to configure it and that sort of thing. And then we recommend a couple of coaching sessions. Each one's about an hour. So that's kind of the learning process. But once you've taken the class, then it takes a few minutes to run an estimate. Now, if you're starting from scratch and you're building a template all your own and you're customizing it to a specific environment, then of course it'll take longer. But once you have the template built, it's saved right on your desktop, or in the cloud, depending on what version you get of this. And then you can go in and just run the estimates at a click of a button. But it'll take some time to create a template and learn how to use the features, right? Like with anything, you'll want to take the class and do the coaching.
Does the software have country-specific project data? For example, the same scope project delivery in a GCC country may take drastically different effort compared to a country in a different part of the world.
Yeah, great question. So our support does. So support's included with the licenses. So if you're using Slim and you have an estimate coming up, we can get online and help you with it. And you could say, hey, I'm doing a project in this particular region and the characteristics are like this. Do you have experience? And then our support team would try their best to help you set that up. The tools themselves, the trend lines are higher level than that. You're going to have trend lines that broken out by application domain, business applications, versus engineering, right, versus real-time and avionics versus telecom. So the trend lines and the tools are broken out at a high level. But the beauty of the tools are that you can put your own data in directly and you can tailor it specific to the regions that you're working in. And that PI will reflect those characteristics and those complexities based on the regions if you set it up that way. By the way, if anybody, always happy to do follow-up demos. So if you all would like to reach out after this, happy to schedule time and actually talk with you specifically about any challenges that you're facing with estimating or historical data capturing, that kind of stuff.
Another question. Can these tools apply to cloud migrations?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think in the headliner, software development was in the title, but you can apply this to any type of technology development process. So it might be cloud migration, it might be microservices type of technology, it might be custom software, it might be a package implementation, it might be an IT development, infrastructure type of development project. So yes to cloud migrations, whether you're doing a lift and shift or whether you're actually, starting from scratch, fully support all of the above, cloud migrations as well as the other things I mentioned.
Do you have data specific to certain software solutions, for example, Oracle, IBM Maximo, SAP, etc., and then specific to subdomains like SAP, Ariba, etc.?
We actually do have it at that level. Now, the tools themselves, it will not say, SAP trendline, right? That's very specific. The trend lines will say, package implementation, or they'll say business application, business agile, business financial. But as part of the support, we can try to help you be more specific and give you some measures that are more specific to what you're doing. But it won't actually say the word Oracle in the tool itself.
Can you support infrastructure types of projects?
Yes, absolutely. So any type of infrastructure development process, right? And so what we'd want you to do, or we'd encourage you to do, is try to get a little bit of historical data on some projects that you've completed where you know how much functionality was delivered and however you want to define it, and you knew the effort and the schedule, and that way we can calculate that productivity index and we can model it in Slim and show you how to create a template, and then you can reuse that template over and over again. And you can make tweaks to it or create new ones. But yes, we can fully support infrastructure development types of programs.
Let's see. One more question, and I think, if there's any last minute questions, feel free to shoot them our way. Otherwise, you can always follow up with us afterwards. But one more that I have right now is, are you able to run estimates for proposal work too?
Yes, absolutely. So you can use Slim. And actually, that's a big sweet spot of ours, is the proposal process, right? Because usually when we're doing proposals, we don't have a lot of information. And a detailed spreadsheet's not going to work usually. It's not going to work very well. Or, doing one of those, using a detailed project management tool is not going to be helpful because you don't know the hours yet. That's where Slim is actually, it really shines because you only need a little bit of information on the project or proposal, and then you can run a full estimate with all the analytics to help negotiate that proposal. So yes, both on the proposal side, you're trying to win business, trying to figure out what to price the work at and how long it's going to take. And also on the other side, if you're buying software and you're trying to decide on what vendor to go with, one vendor's coming in saying, hey, it's going to cost a couple $1,000,000, it's going to take this amount of time. Another vendor's telling you something totally different. You can use the Slim tools to figure out which bid is more realistic and which is more cost effective.
Well, that is all the questions that we have for now, but as I mentioned, you can always follow up with us afterwards, and we will have a replay available so you can catch anything that you missed. And thank you, Keith, for a great presentation today, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we host these types of webinars regularly, so stay tuned. We will send emails when we have another one coming up.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate it. Look forward to the next one.